Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everybody. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam tasliman kathira. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. First of all, welcome new students and our existing students to Zaytuna College. This is our convocation, which is really to open up the school year, particularly for the master students, but we certainly are welcoming the incoming class, small but potent, of our freshmen and the returning students. Alhamdulillah, this year is for us an exciting year for a number of reasons. One, we have a really beautiful campus that's in essence been gifted to us, and it's very important to study in a beautiful place, because what you're studying is really about beauty, truth, goodness, and beauty. These are the great virtues of the ancient world, and they were virtues that the Muslims certainly not only cultivated but excelled at. They always made their madrasas beautiful, and even the most simple of schools, we could imagine the Prophet ﷺ's mosque, which was really his university, it was his madrasa. But for anybody who's ever been in very simple places, I lived in a place called Geru in West Africa, and it was a very simple mud, adobe village, but it was really one of the most beautiful places I've ever lived. So even the utter simplicity of the beauty of nature, imagine having a masjid that's basically built from the natural world around you. The roof is made out of date fibers, and the pillars were made out of the date palm tree, and very simple but beautiful straw mat carpets that grace the place. So it must have been a stunningly beautiful place to study for that early community. But the Muslims excelled at building beautiful institutions, because the perpetuity of a tradition is strongest when it has institutions that can transmit it to future generations. So just like we're all links in a chain, those of us who are teachers now, and still students, all of us remain students, but those of us who have been ubtilina bit-ta'lim, with the tribulation of teaching, because it is a tribulation, with the tribulation of teaching, we're links in a chain of a tradition that goes back 1400 years. And one of the aspects of that tradition is advice, wasiyah, giving advice. The Prophet ﷺ, if you look at the final Hajj, the last message to his ummah was all advice. Take care of your women folk. Stawsu bin nisa'i khayra. Take care of your women folk. Avoid racism. Avoid manipulating nature. Those were all his final advice. Even on his deathbed, the last thing he gave was advice. Take care of your servants. Take care of your women. The prayer. Guard your prayer. So this is one of the aspects of the tradition, which is advice. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the best advice when he said, we give you the advice that we gave the previous peoples before you, that you should be awfully aware of God. Awful in the original sense of that word, filled with awe. That anittaqullah. وَلَقَدْ وَصَّيْنَا وَالَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ وَإِيَّاكُمْ أَنِ اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ, that you should have, we gave advice to the previous people and to you, that you should have this awful awareness of God. So in the spirit of advice, I want to give you students a few pieces of advice. And because we're attempting to do something I think is really unusual, and that is to grapple with two traditions. It's hard enough to grapple with one tradition, and very few people ever master one tradition. Very few people ever master even one segment of one tradition. If you look at our tradition, for instance, the qira'at of the Quran, there's 10 variants of the Quran that are considered acceptable. Those take now, for most people that master them, they take a good lifetime to learn. Calligraphy alone is a lifetime study now. So many aspects of the tradition really do take a lifetime. There's a young 22-year-old Arab boy who has memorized all 9 collections of the hadith. He was tested recently in the Haram, and it was really stunning to watch the testing by muhaddithun. They would only give him the first part of the hadith, and he would finish it and then tell which book it was in. And it was really quite a masterful performance. But the point is, he was gifted with a photographic memory, obviously, and our ummah has had many people like that. I've met a few myself. That's a great gift. Memory is a great gift, and it's really it is a prerequisite to studying tradition, to have a retentive memory at least. It's not a condition for ijtihad that you have rote memorization, but you have to know where to find the things in the books at least. So in the spirit of that, I'll look from 2 traditions. I'm going to give you some fatherly advice to our younger students. The one comes from Imam al-Juwayni, who said, "Akhi," or asikh in a riwayah, "Lan tanal al-ilma illa bi sittatin." You will not acquire knowledge except with 6 things. سأنبيك بالتفصيل عن بيانها. عن بياني. I will give you in detail what those 6 things are. And then the first one, he said, ذكاء, which is intelligence. You have to have some level of intelligence to grapple with this. Now, one of the things about our tradition is that we actually believe in what's called a fath, and one of the names of God is al-fattah, the opener, the one who opens and gives you openings. I saw a fatwa in Al-Wan Sharisi that really struck me as interesting. It was a fatwa about a student in Fez who was not very smart, but he was really struggling. And they asked whether or not he should be kicked out and his stipend taken away from him. And then the fatwa is give him 10 years, and if the fath doesn't come to him by then, get rid of him. So that was quite good. There's a Mauritanian story just about fath because it's important. Because some of you, all of us feel that our intelligence is not what we would like it to be. Hence, we've got a whole industry of AI trying to work out how we can just insert chips into our brain and become supercomputers. But all of us feel that we're not really worthy or intelligent enough to grapple with some of these ideas. So just 2 quick stories. One, there was a Mauritanian who studied the Mukhtasar of Khalil, and it takes a few years to study this book. It's a book of really riddles, and he had a very difficult time with it. And it just wasn't making sense to him. And he had studied it 10 times, and he still really couldn't understand it. And he decided he was going to give up, and he went and he was sitting by an anthill. And one of the things the Mauritanians love to do is watch insects and bugs. It's like a culture of entomologists, because in the desert, there's not a lot to watch. And so you get, I really got used to watching lizards, and dung beetles are fascinating to watch, carrying their dung around. We've got a whole culture of dung beetles now. But he watched this ant trying to get a piece of couscous up the anthill, and it kept rolling down. It was like Sisyphus. And the ant did it 10 times, and on the 11th time it got in with this piece of couscous. And he said to himself, I can't let an ant have greater aspiration than me. I'm going to do it one more time. And he had his opening. So that's a famous story. Another story is a famous story of Imam al-Taftazani, who was noted to be not very bright. And he had an incredible spiritual experience. And after that, he was noted for his incredible ability to grapple with the most difficult metaphysical concepts with incredible dexterity. So there is hope for us. We should always aspire. Ya Fatah, Ya Alim, Iftah lana Fathan Qariba was a traditional dua. I was taught that by Habib Ahmed Mashhur al-Haddad as a dua for study. You call on the Fatah, the opener, and the knower. So dhaka is something that we know now with neuroplasticity that it actually does increase as you study. So, and they used to think that it closed at about adolescence, but it actually continues on throughout your life. So the more you study, actually the bigger your intellect gets. And Sayyidina Umar said, "Ta'allam al-Arabiyya fa'innaha tazidu fil aql." Learn Arabic because it will increase your intelligence. And we know this now to be true, that if you learn a subject, it will actually increase the neuroplasticity of your brain, will adapt to the new things. There will be more dendritic connections and you'll be smarter and brighter. So you should see that as you study. And the harder you study, the brighter you get. Like the golfer who made an incredible putt, and somebody said to him, "That was so lucky." He said, "The more I practice, the luckier I get." The same is true for studying. The more you study, the more intelligent you'll get. So, and then he said, "Dhaka'un wa hirsun," being covetous for knowledge, like really being covetous, hirsun, wanting to know. And this is one of the things Aristotle begins his great book on metaphysics, which Ibn Sina read 50 times before he understood it. He begins it by saying that all people want to know, that it's part of our nature. This is why little children ask why. Then little children they're the metaphysicians of the world, because their great question is always why. It's not how. They want to know why. They want to know causation. And so hirs is really important, to have an intense desire for knowledge. And then there's two riwayah. One says istibarun, which is patience, and that's certainly true. Isbiru wa sabiru, be patient, but also enjoin each other to patience. Tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bil sabr. They advise each other to the truth, but also to be patient, because study is incremental. You scaffold in your studying. It's an incremental. You have plateaus, and learning goes. Initially you might have a lot of insights, and then you plateau, and those plateaus are very difficult because you get bored. And so it's very important, and boredom is the great enemy. This is the great one of the 7 deadly sins is called acedia, which they called it the noonday devil, because it was the one that afflicted monks more than anything, because they were supposed to meditate in their cells and they would get bored. And so boredom, they call it now a type of laziness. But it's really an ennui that sets in, this type of boredom. And one of the things that the great philosopher Kierkegaard said is that people who remove God from their lives, they become afflicted with a deep boredom. They become very bored with life. And he said always accompanying that boredom is a type of cynicism. And so they're always looking to be stimulated because they're just bored with everything. Whereas people that have God in their lives are in a constant state of wonder, because God is just so extraordinary and so amazing and so bewildering. One of the meanings of al-ilah in Arabic is the one that bewilders, that creates hayra in you. So that's very important, is to learn how to be alone with yourself, right? It's very difficult for a lot of people. So istibarun, and in another riwayah, ijtihadun, to really struggle and give a lot of effort. And then he said, wa bulghatun. Bulgha in Arabic is what will get you somewhere. It's like the provision you need to complete a task. Balagh is from balagha, to reach something. So bulgha is what enables you to reach something. So the bulgha is, people here, you've been given a great gift, which is leisure time. It's time where you don't have to worry about the cost of things. Imam al-Shafi'i, he said, لو كلفت شراء بصرة شراء بصرة ما تعلمت مسألة. If I was forced to worry about how much the price of onions were, I would have never learned. In other words, having to think about worldly affairs all the time really prevents you from that type of stress-free environment. As stress-free as possible. Dunya is stressful by nature. And then he said, and then there's another riwayah, ghurba, which is being in a place where you're not from. Because when you're in a place where you're from, you've got all your friends and all your distractions. But by moving away to another place, that's why rihla was so important in the Islamic tradition for study, was actually to take a journey to learn, to get away from your environs that were distracting, all your friends and all your companions. And then he said, وَتَلْقِينُ أُسْتَاذٍ, and then to learn from a teacher, talqinu ustadhin. It's very important. Traditionally, it was said that the knowledge was in the breasts of men and women, obviously, because there are many great women scholars, especially in that early period. The Tabaqat of Ibn Sa'd is filled with women. And historically, about 15% of notable scholars in any generation were women. This has clearly been proven by the Tabaqat literature, the biographical literature of scholars, that between 10 and 15% in any generation of notable scholars were women. So we did have many, many great female scholars. They tended not to write out of modesty and humility because writing was considered very dangerous. That's why there's so few tafsirs. Despite the fact that we had so many great scholars, they just didn't want to write about the Book of Allah. And that's why we have so many tajweed books and grammar books, because they weren't worried about getting those wrong. And then he said, وَطُولُ zamani, and having time. That knowledge really takes a lot of time. So you have to have the time to learn. And when you graduate from the BA, this is really the beginning of the journey. And then the master's, traditionally the master's was our highest degree in the West. The PhD was a research degree that came later. But the original master's was the highest degree because it was a license to teach, which still in our culture, it's a license to teach. That what it's saying is that you've studied enough to be able to transmit what you've studied to other people. So you have to work to become masters as best to your ability, because when you get that degree, you can go to a college, you can go to a high school, and you can get a job as a teacher. And so it's very important that it not be in our tradition we have what's called shahadat al-zur, which is false testimony. And Sheikh Muhammad al-Amin al-Shinqiti was asked once what the best definition for false testimony was. And the word in Arabic for testimony and for diploma are the same. And he said it's these diplomas that you get when you graduate from this institution. He was teaching in Medina. So you don't want your shahada to be shahadat al-zur. You want it to be really to be meaningful. And then Qadi Abu Bakr also gave advice. He said that you have to have humility. There's a verse in the Quran that says, "Sa'sirufu an ayati alladhina yatakabbaruna fil ard." I will remove my signs from those who have arrogance in the earth, bighayri haqq, without any warrant for that, because only Allah is mutakabbir. Only Allah can declare His greatness. And so that's very important, humility, that without humility you will not be able to learn. And arrogant people can have information, but they will never have wisdom. It's just, they're mutually exclusive. And so that's very important. And then he said also to have humility before the subject. There's a charitable reading of things. You should always read things first charitably before you read them judgmentally. To have a type of humility to make sure you understand things. كَمْ مِنْ عَائِبٍ قَوْلًا صَحِيحًا وَآفَاتُ فِي الْفَهْمِ السَّقِيمِ. And Mutanabbi says, how many people find fault in something, and the fault is their understanding of that thing. Right? Because you didn't understand the grammar of it, or there was a misprint and you assumed that it was right, or you were applying something from another science to that science that wasn't applicable, like demanding precision in one science that doesn't allow for the type of precision that you think it allows. So that's very important, is to have humility before the subject. And then he said humility before the teacher. It's very important to have humility before the teacher. And sometimes teachers will have students that really challenge them because they're smarter than them. Right? Because I had students that I know are smarter than me. And you really have to respect their intellect, but they also have to understand that there's a type of humility that's necessary with intelligence, that if it's not there, it's very easy to become arrogant, and it becomes very dangerous. And so even if you think that you might understand something better than the teacher, be very careful, because you might not, and if you do, there's a great wisdom and benefit in just simply being humble, because it's a great gift. And then having a good opinion. Husn al-dhan is very, very good. They called St. Thomas Aquinas the dumb ox, and they used to make a lot of jokes with him because he was very easy to play tricks on. And there's a story once that one of the monks was looking out the window, and he said, "Oh my God, a flying cow." And Aquinas went to the window to look, and they all started laughing. And he just turned and said, "Better to believe in flying cows than monks that lie." So Husn al-dhan is a very good approach, just to have a good opinion, to think the best of people before you think the worst. And then he said to scaffold, like to recognize grammar is what, it all begins with grammar. If you don't know grammar, you cannot learn a civilizational tradition, because it's based on grammar. And also, obviously, logic, which is very important. We're trying to restore the centrality of that science in our tradition. And the logic that we're learning is a logic that a lot of people that are involved in this area think it's been supplanted by other forms of logic. Propositional logic. Gottlob Frege started this movement to get rid of the metaphysics of logic, which is largely found in the concept. So the type of logic that we're teaching here is a classical form of logic, but it's very important because one of the things that we talk about, freedom of speech. Everybody clamors about freedom of speech, which is a highly overrated privilege. Freedom of speech, or some people obviously would view it as a right. Freedom of speech is predicated on freedom of thought, and freedom of thought is predicated on being able to think freely. Most people can't think freely because they're shackled with the constraints of their own intellects, with the logical fallacies, like hasty generalization. You're not thinking freely if you make a hasty generalization. You're thinking based upon a default setting of the mind itself. And then he talks also about mudhakara, which is very important. Most of your study will be on your own, and then when you do mudhakara with your fellow students, in other words, speaking amongst them about the subject matter. And that's why the cohort system is so important, because the cohort system creates a community of learners, because you're reading the same books. And one of the gifts of different people reading the same book is they find out they're reading different books, because their understandings differ. And so they can allow insights. Somebody might have an insight that you didn't know. And one of the studies they did at UC Berkeley that I studied when I was at GTU was a really interesting study about group learning. And they were struck by how good the Asians did in math and how poor some of the other communities were doing in math. So they took some of the other communities that were doing poorly in math. First of all, they studied what the Asians were doing. They found, by and large, they studied math together. And so they would help each other work out the problems. So they actually had these students groups, minority groups that were not doing as well in math, actually study together. And consistently, they found that their grades went up from that. So mudhakara is very important. So that's an Islamic tradition. Now I want to look at quickly at, and then I'll conclude my remarks. I'll look at from the Western tradition. We have Shakespeare, who was obviously a great master of many, many subjects. It's clear for anybody who's ever read Shakespeare. He was also a great sportsman. He knew a lot about different sports, especially bowling is one of his favorite, traditional English bowling. So like, there's the rub. That's a sporting metaphor there that he's using. So he has advice to Laertes, who was going off to study from his father Polonius. And he says, and these few precepts in thy memory. In other words, retain these. I'm going to give you some advice. I want you to retain them. See thou character. Really work on your character, on your akhlaq, your moral well-being. Give thy thoughts no tongue. Don't always have to give your opinion. Give thy thoughts no tongue, nor any unproportioned thought his act. In other words, don't act on thoughts that you haven't fully deliberated. Really think deeply about what you do before you do something, because most of the major mistakes we make in life are from doing things without thinking. And one of the most amazing things about our tradition is what's called istikhara, which is where if you're going to do anything of any serious consideration, you always do istikhara, which is a prayer where you actually pray to God, astakhiruka, right? I ask you to choose for me. Right, astakhiruka, with your knowledge, astaqdiruka biqudratika, and I'm asking you with your ability to do that. So that's very important. And then he says, "Be thou familiar, but by no means vulgar." Be familiar with people, but don't go down to that level that very often happens when people become too familiar, which is where they tend to become vulgar, right? Vulgarian is a word you might want to look up, because we have a whole culture now of vulgarians, where people that swear for no reason. One of the signs of the end of time, the Prophet said, you will see obscenity without any reason. Because it used to be people swore when they got angry. Now people just swear, right? Just for the sake of it. And obscenity it's obscene for a reason. Every culture has obscene words. So that's something very important. Don't become vulgar. The friends thou hast and their adoption tried, grapple them to thy soul with hoops of steel. The Prophet ﷺ said one of the signs of the end of time is, he said, you should count yourself lucky if you have one true friend. And a true friend is gold, right? It's the one that yushattitu shamluhu liyajma'ak. He will do everything. He will basically pull himself apart to pull you together. So that's a true friend. So true friends are rare. And it's a very high maqam in Islam, the maqam of sadaqah. And siddiq in Arabic, which is a true friend, means the one who's truthful. They're not obsequious, or they'll tell you what they really think. But do not dull thy palm with entertainment. You could look at this a few different ways, but one of the meanings is, don't everybody you shake hands with, don't let them become your boon companion. Just because a lot of people just like sitting around with people and just shooting the breeze, and if you find an entertaining person, it becomes a type of enjoyment. So don't dull thy palm with entertainment by just going around looking for people to associate with. And one of the snares of the devil with students is to get them to do everything except study. So you will constantly be distracted. And I feel sorry for students today in that the distractions are much greater than they've ever been for people. So I had the good fortune of studying in some really isolated places, so I know the blessing of pure isolation. And then he says, of each new hatched, do not dull thy palm with entertainment of each new hatched, unfledged comrade. Right, so beware of entrance to a quarrel, but being in, bear that the opposed may beware of thee. So don't jidal. Imam Malik radiallahu anhu, literally, he was once in a gathering and they started arguing, and he got up and he shook his rida, almost like a masseuse shakes their hands out after they massage, just to kind of get that out of their system. He shook his rida and he said, Antum harb. He said, you're war. And he left. And he used to say, Laysa al-jidal min ad-din fi shay. This religion has nothing to do with argumentation. And a man came to him once and said, he was from the Murji'iyah, one of the sects, and he said, Ya Aba Abdillah, ujadiruka. Let me argue with you about this issue. And Imam Malik said, وَإِذَا غَرَبْتَنِي, And if you win the argument, he said, تتبعني, you follow me. He said, وَإِذَا غَرَبْتُكَ, he said, أتبعك, if I win, I'll follow you. And then he said, وَإِذَا جَاءَ ثَالِثٌ وَغَلَبَنَا, what if a third comes and he defeats both of us? He said, نَتْبَعُهُ, he said, we'll follow him. He said, my friend, you're going to be on a new religion every day. And he said, as for me, I know what I know and I know where I got it. And that's what I'm following. So that's tradition. That you don't have to grapple with things in each generation. You have a kind of consistent truth that's been transmitted. You have to still grapple with it because not all of it's absolute. But that's important. Not to get into arguments, get into discussions. But it's very different from argumentation. Give every man thine ear, but few thy voice. This is very good advice for a student. Listen attentively, because this is the time of listening, but don't be so quick to give your opinion about things. Take each man's censure, but reserve thy judgment. Listen to people's criticisms of you and take them seriously, but don't be too quick to criticize others. Imam Shafi'i was once asked, how did you get such good character? He said, I always listen to my critics. If they made him think about, he's got a point, I talk too much, or I argue too much, or I'm arrogant, then he would work on changing that. And then he said, costly thy habit as thy purse can buy, but not expressed in fancy, rich not gaudy. Wear something that's appropriate to your station. Don't dress like a poor person if you're not poor. And don't be gaudy. For the apparel oft proclaims the man. This is something that modern people have completely dismissed, although in reality their apparel often does declare them. Traditional people always dressed well because they knew what the human being was. It's a very exalted creature. And this is why all traditional clothes have an elevating quality in them. Even peasants dressed beautifully. And they always had good clothes to wear on special occasions. Now we have T-shirts at award ceremonies. This is the type of culture that we're in. So, and just look at any pictures from before the 1960s in any civilization on this planet, and look how people dressed, and look at the way they dress today, because it does declare who they are. Their minds are like that. Their minds are sloucher minds, and so that's reflected in their own state. And then he says, neither a borrower nor a lender be. Good advice. To not give surety is surety, as one of the great Greek wise men said. For loan oft loses both itself and friend. You loan people money and you lose their friendship. This above all, and then finally he concludes, going back to the beginning, see thou character. This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day. Thou canst not then be false to any man. If you're true to yourself, you'll be true to other people. But if you're false to yourself, you're going to be false to other people. So that's very good advice. So we're blessed to be starting this year. We're excited about this class. It's a small class, but we're expecting big things from the class. And this is the beginning of something, and inshallah you are sabiqun, and may you be sabiqun in the literal meaning of that, because you are sabiqun just by the mere fact that you're the first doing this, but may you be sabiqun also spiritually, people that outstrip and really work hard. One of the most important things that people have a really difficult time today is being alone. And one of the things that this machine does is it prevents people from ever being alone with themselves now, because you just constantly can be entertained. But you have to learn to be alone. And one of the great scholars, he said, لِقَاءُ النَّاسِ لَيْسَ يُفِيدُ شَيْئًا سِوَى الْهَذَيَانِ مِنْ قِيلًا وَقَالِ. That meeting people really doesn't benefit a lot other than just kind of empty he said, she said words. فَأَقْلًا مِنْ لِقَاءِ النَّاسِ إِلَّا لِأَخْذِ عِلْمًا وَإِصْلَاحِ حَالِ. So don't have a lot of meetings with people except to rectify your state by meeting with people in a better state than you, and to learn, to study. So I really hope you take that advice. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give all of you tawfiq. I want to just especially extend an immense gratitude to the people that worked on this program and were able to really convince WASC, inshallah we believe justifiably, that this program was viable and that it was in accordance with the standards that WASC has set for the schools and colleges of the western part of the United States. Dr. Delp, our Dean of Faculty, worked incredibly hard on a very, very excellent report for our substantive change. He had immense help from his team. We've been blessed to have Sumaira Akhtar. We also had Dr. Hatem, Imam Zaid, and other faculty members that helped with this, Dr. Omar Quraishi and Dr. Fadi and others that helped. So there was a lot of work that went into this, and I'll just conclude by saying that like all starts, there's going to be some bumps in the road, so you're going to have to help us also navigate those bumps, but don't get frustrated. Just see them as the challenges that come with life on earth. We're committed to making things better, inshallah, and better for you, better for us, and better for this institution. Jazakumullah khairan wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We'd just like to take a moment, inshallah ta'ala, to invite Mehdi Amin to the podium, please.
Assalamu alaikum. We're going to celebrate this, inshallah, with opening, and so I invite everyone to celebrate with us together, inshallah. طلع البدر علينا من ثنيات الوداع وجب الشكر علينا ما دعا لله داع طلع البدر علينا من ثنيات الوداع وجب شكر علينا ما دعا لله داع. Oh, the white moon rose over us from the valley of Wada, and we owe it to show gratefulness. The call is to Allah. طلع علينا من ثنيات الوداع وجب علينا لله داع. Oh, you who were raised amongst us, coming with a word to be obeyed, you have brought to California nobleness. You have brought to California nobleness. You have brought to California nobleness. Welcome, best caller to God's way. طلع علينا من ثنيات الوداع وجب الشكر علينا لله داع. صلى الله على محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم 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 تكبير الله أكبر السلام عليكم
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Jazakumullah khair for the song, for the nasheed. This is a celebration for the beginning of the master degree program at Zaytuna College, and we have our first incoming class. This would not have been possible without the hard work of a number of people that I would like to recognize to begin with. And I think one is Dr. Mark Delp, who really took on the forging of our own independent master degree. We were thinking about creating an MA degree jointly with GTU, so that's still in the back burner, and we forged ahead with our own independent MA degree, which required far more work than possibly would have been needed to do so. So really we have to recognize that work. Sumaira, sitting in the back, she became our in-house expert on WASC, so much so that now WASC have taken her to actually become part of visitation team, and she just had last past week training, so she would go visit other institutions to be part of the accreditation process. So in here her work is tremendous. And now for us, we're actually going to have another WASC visit for the BA degree in the institution next February. So we're beginning the work right now to prepare our files and our documents institutionally for WASC visit. So this is very important that we have someone in-house that is able to know the topography of the accreditation process as well as the inside working of WASC, the same institution that accredits UC Berkeley, Stanford, and other institutions is accrediting us as an institution. So the master degree really owes a lot to the work that have made it possible for this. Catherine, just for those who came, the students in the MA degree this morning, when we had our first orientation, they received the catalog, and it just was hot off the press that the first page table of content was missing. So talk about what you call adjusting. This is, again, the shortness of the period of developing a program and going through accreditation, that the letter of accreditation arrived on August 1st. So this is, again, the type of energy and work that is needed to bring this together. Catherine and her team administratively were tremendous in putting this work. And then our faculty that came to work on the master degree, we have Omar Quraishi, who's now moved into the MA degree, Sheikh Ma'shuq, who's also in the MA degree, Jawad Quraishi. Now we have two Quraishis, faculty, and also two Quraishis as students. So we'll see in terms of the strength of Quraishis coming in order to help our institution. Also Dr. Fadi as well. So we have a team, a faculty team that is dedicated itself to the graduate program. You might ask what this graduate program mean in terms of our institutional development. This morning I actually made an analogy. Even though I'm not a baseball player, I still could do a baseball analogy. In the BA degree, you are actually only being instructed of what the baseball field is about, the length of a wooden bat and a metal bat, the color of the ball, all of the theories about baseball you were actually studying in the BA degree. For the MA degree, you're actually being invited to spring training. In order, hopefully, when you write your thesis, you might be allowed to actually take a couple of hits from somebody that is an expert or highly advanced in the National League. So essentially right now, as an MA student, you're just being invited to the spring training. And hopefully you actually make it through the training in order to become part of the intellectual team relative to the MA degree. As you know, many of us who studied possibly in the past had to travel abroad in order to study. Some people studied in Yemen, some in Syria, some in Mauritania, some in Egypt, some went possibly to the Indian subcontinent. It is difficult these days to actually go abroad to study the Islamic sciences. The places that are left were not only in terms of security and safety, but really the availability of resources in there is very limited. I would say today, if you go and study in Yemen, most likely you'll end up in 10 years on the no-fly list, right, in terms of the complication associated in there, and not even thinking about the cultural impacts and the things that you possibly add to your studies that also you have to unlearn as you arrive in this country. So this program begins the process of us, inshallah, to graduate students that will be immersed in the Islamic text, to actually study Islam from within the tradition in a way that you are covetous about the tradition to try to embark on its development and stretching it to the new generation in order for us to graduate, hopefully, inshallah, scholars that will address the needs of our own society and our own community. Simultaneously, you're also being invited to partake in another tradition simultaneously. And Sheikh Hamza said it's very difficult even to specialize in one aspect of our tradition, let alone being able to try to engage and delve into two traditions simultaneously. But this is what is needed, because we need to understand the civilizational discourse that is taking place intellectually, as well as all the arguments that are there that is not unique to Islam, but actually confront religious traditions across the board. And again, the Christian tradition is as challenged as the Islamic tradition with some of the modern tendencies that are there. So again, this conversation is very important. In our application, actually, to WASC, in each of the areas of concentration, you are able to do a comparative approach. So we're starting with two tracks, which is the Islamic philosophy and theology and Islamic law, but we actually applied for 4 tracks, history as well as Arabic language. So we're starting with 2. In any of those tracks, you could actually do an MA thesis that will actually have a comparative approach. So if you want to work, let's say, with some of our counterparts at GTU, especially with the Dominican, you are able to do that because we think it's very important to allow and make it possible to have a comparative approach because of the location that we are in. As well, I would argue that's how our tradition in the historical period in the past. If you think about how Islamic tradition developed in its major centers, whether it's Damascus, Baghdad, or even Cordoba, and some of the major pillars of Islamic civilization, that the conversation was always taking place among various traditions in conversation. So if you think there is such thing, clash of civilization, civilizations don't clash. Only ignorant people do, right? There's always civilizational conversation. And that conversation, the intellectual one, the one who actually looks at the ideas, try to benefit. And that's the Prophet ﷺ, al-hikmatu dallatul mu'min, right? The wisdom is the last beast of the believer, or the last camel of the believer for our tradition in that sense, meaning that there is no clash wherever there's good ideas that can improve humanity in general. What we're being invited at this point is to create that conversation in a serious, deeper way, and to graduate students that will be able to understand and grapple with this tradition. I know that Mark Delp is going to come after. Our task now is to begin working for the PhD program. He says, when we're going to start, I said tomorrow, but inshallah, that's the discussion. If you're not building at this point of time, then you're wasting your time. For me, building is what our tradition is about, and I'd rather build and fail rather than not build at all. So we are moving toward building, inshallah, and with your dua and support, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it possible. I welcome the new students and welcome the new freshmen, and inshallah you're partaking in really an effort that is historical in nature. Just think about the early slaves that arrived in here. They did not build institution, and one of the main feature of transmission of a tradition is building institution. So without institution, you cannot transmit tradition. And our institution, or Zaytuna, is about transmission of our tradition on the highest level of intellectual pursuit. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give everybody tawfiq, and look forward to seeing you in the class. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Pax vobiscum, salam alaikum. There's much to say about Zaytuna's master's program, past, present, and future. The past is so present in my mind that it's hard for me to believe that there is actually a present right now. That present being a fully approved program. I keep thinking that there are more tasks to do in my dreams. There's always one more. Once that task is done, then there's a letter that promises another one. So our next task, however, is to make what we have achieved work, or better, to enjoy what we've made. What does having an MA mean for Zaytuna? It's an unusual thing for an unusual college. We are all in a hurry, always have been. Dr. Hatem keeps mentioning getting a PhD. Started in 3 years? Okay. And I always say it's not happening. He always smiles and says just what he did. The MA certainly has alleviated a privation. Throughout my years at Zaytuna, I've listened to students wonder where they might continue their studies. They were so close to finishing here. And the best advice I could often give is simply find a program where there's a few good scholars capable of bringing them a bit farther along the way, and a department that at least has some of the ideals they cultivated here. But it was a piecemeal hope for a piecemeal education, a consolation and a chance to continue, to carry on. Now we find ourselves in the present with students able to carry on at a depth I do not believe is possible at any other college in America. The skills and the virtues of the Islamic sciences going further and further into the heart and mind of their beloved faith. These are not just rare studies. They are categorically different from those studied in the universities. They differ also categorically even from the small liberal arts colleges that have become our sister institutions, such as St. John's of Annapolis and Santa Fe and St. Thomas Aquinas College, I should say Thomas Aquinas College. The Zaytuna students, unlike these other students, will be studying all their texts, all primary Islamic texts in the original Arabic language. And that's virtually unprecedented. I thank God that this master's degree was not only possible at Zaytuna, but thanks to the vision of Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, could take on a form and focus that by God's grace would make it actual. And in such a relatively short time. Though it seemed a very long time to those who were working on it. And the students waiting to see it happen, who also worked on it. I'll tell you a little bit about the past, namely, the last academic year through which we worked continuously on the process established by our accreditors, WASC, the Western Association of Schools and Colleges. Although Zaytuna had been discussing a master's degree for many years, we made the decision to go ahead with it in a president's cabinet meeting about a year ago. It wasn't with quite the macho swagger of an action movie hero whose only significant line seems to be, "Let's do it." But we were just as decisive. But we didn't know how to start. Where do we get the application? What will we have to do? We can ask Samara, she'll know. And she did, of course. She got the application, which was called by the strange name of Application for Substantive Change, which, if you've had training in scholastic philosophy, you may be forgiven for reading as substantial change, which means that radical change from non-being to being, which we witness in the birth of things. I tried to say the WASC phrase as it was, but it inevitably came out as the scholastic one, which is okay. They didn't notice. Sorry. We were bringing something into being, but not quite ex nihilo. We always thought, and continue to do so, that the MA is a natural outgrowth of the BA program. It is a beautiful green shoot, as it were, sprouted from the same olive tree that has nourished the college up until now. So how is it different? This was one of the more difficult questions to answer on the form. My first inclination was to say, well, it's more difficult, isn't it? Even though it's going to deal with the same stuff, more or less, it's going to be a lot more difficult. There, that was the starting point. But as the scholastics also say, a difference in degree or quantity is not a difference in kind, necessarily. And our WASC masters wanted the difference in kind spelled out. I'm not sure we answered that one to their satisfaction. Maybe the MA students will be able to do so. But I do think that the difference in degree is indeed significant and enough to lend to the MA program its own positive identity. Intensification, greater focus, unforeseen profundity, and the minor miracle of witnessing one's skills allow the mind to take flight within the text. As the scholastics also said, it is rare to be able to formulate an essential definition of natural beings. And our MA program, I think, qualifies eminently as a natural being. Of the adjectives I just mentioned, I think of greater focus, or I should say greater focus comes closest to being the vicarious difference. For the core curriculum will contain nothing but Islamic texts read in the original Arabic. Back briefly to the past. Visitations from above or below of WASC teams. The first, an invisible visitation by conference call. My clearest and most palpable memory of that was of everyone, the whole team, in the conference room, straining toward the microphones connected to the conference phone. It was a strange way of communicating, hard enough simply to think and answer the questions, but made more difficult by our stretching our necks out like ostriches to the microphones. Since the visitors were not in the room, we could glance at each other for split seconds of silence, while, with psychic eye contact, suggest the right answer to each other. We were all exceptionally wide-eyed throughout the entire hour of the interview or so, but all thought it went very well. I thought it really did go very well. But we all knew that one never knew. We would have to wait and see. We were told that that interview would be our only one if it went well. But we learned in the letter that soon arrived that it was the other way around. We would get another meeting if it did go well, which it did. That was my first experience of a certain wobbliness, so to speak, in WASC planning. In the end, we got used to hoping to see letters come and then go on hoping. In March, the visitors came in the flesh. 2 men, an older scholar from Claremont College and a WASC technician. That day was a great challenge for us, and we rose to that challenge in a magnificent way. The scholar asked all the questions, emphasizing certain issues, some of which perplex everyone. Tag teams of Zaytuna teachers, students, staff, founders, coming back to my office to debrief, nervousness before being interviewed, apprehensiveness after, several being quite upset. What did the scholar's question mean? Why in the world did I answer like that? The stakes were so high that we were sensitive to every nuance of criticism. But overall, whenever a group would come in and prepare and then come back and debrief, I experienced a sense of beautiful solidarity and a grand unity of purpose. More waiting, report delayed or not being done, bit of worry, then something encouraging. Interim approval. This was good news indeed, but nobody could say exactly what it meant. Sumaira said it was good. That was good enough for us. It was clear that we were going to have to be satisfied with incremental approval. Somewhat of a letdown for me, who imagined a grueling set of interrogations followed by the acceptance letter, fireworks, street parties, and floats. We eventually heard that the visiting team recommended us to the final committee tasked to make the final decision regarding approval. This was really excellent news, but unconfirmed. Let's just say the word was going around WASC circles. Then we got a letter from the approval committee saying that they approved the approval of the visiting team. And shortly after that, we had splendid news that we were ready to get the final approval from the last approving body. A bit of a deflation here too, since they only met at the end of July, which of course was pushing us very close to the beginning of the semester. And they did. But word was around WASC that they would approve, and they did. When the letter came, the official letter of approval, it came as an email, and I was initially unable to figure it out. I was expecting enthusiastic congratulations, good luck, job well done, etc., but found myself reading another technical manual. I had to ask Sumaira whether it was really an approval or not. It was, but what it lacked in style, it made up for by listing point by point the things we accomplished on our way to being approved. And it looked quite gruesome. It was very, very severe and rigorous. And that really was very satisfying. Joking aside, our WASC colleagues were virtually all kind, encouraging, intelligent, and well-meaning. Our accreditors liked working with us. I think they feel something here that they feel nowhere else. Certainly there is an exotic ambience, but I think it is more an extraordinary sincerity and authenticity. Future, undetermined. But after today's orientation and the good energy I felt throughout it all, and Sheikh Mashouk's lecture gathering us all together, even me, since even though he spoke often in Arabic, his material involved a lot of logic. And we all know that logicians, you understand, each understand each other beyond all conventional languages. So after today's orientation, I feel we're on our way already to building something wonderful and unique. Again, I thank God I was given the chance to work on this project, which has proved to be one of the most exhilarating things I've ever done. God bless you all. Pax vobiscum. Salam alaikum.
Please join me in supplication and closing out today's orientation. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Hamdan yuwafi ni'mahu yukafi'u mazida. ربنا لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك والعظيم سلطانك. ربنا لا نحصي ثناء عليك كما أثنيت على نفسك. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد في الأولين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد في الآخرين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد في الملأ على إلى يوم الدين يا رب العالمين. O Allah, we ask you in this blessed place, in this blessed time, with these blessed people, to open up for us an opening from you, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, we ask you to bless our co-founders, Ya Allah. To bless our dean of faculty, Ya Allah. To bless the staff, Ya Allah. And to bless the faculty, Ya Allah. And to bless these students, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, you have brought us here through your wisdom on this journey, and you are the all-wise. Ya Allah, we ask you to open up to us your wisdom, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, allow us to see the beauty of this project, Ya Allah, for the beauty that you see in it, Ya Allah, and allow us to work for it. Ya Allah, we ask you for every intention that we have for goodness, Ya Allah, that you allow that to be manifest, Ya Allah. And for every intention that we have to fulfill and we are unable, or through our shortcomings we do not, Ya Allah, that you allow it to be seen when we meet you, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, we ask you to make us people of sincerity. Ya Allah, we ask you to make us people of sincerity. Ya Allah, we ask you to make us people of sincerity, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, we ask you to allow this institution to be a beacon of light in a time of darkness, Ya Allah. We ask you to allow this institution to be a place of guidance in a time of confusion, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, bless these youth, Ya Allah. They are giving their time, Ya Allah, in this developmental stage of their lives, Ya Allah, to have an education to know you, Ya Allah. Avail yourself to us, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, we ask you to bless them in their decisions, Ya Allah. We ask you to give them courage, Ya Allah. We ask you to give them strength, Ya Allah. And we ask you to give them patience, Ya Allah. Increase them, increase all of us in patience, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, we ask you for the best of what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has asked you for. And we seek refuge in you from the most evil of things that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam sought refuge in you with, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, we ask you to enlighten the beginning of this project and the end of this project, Ya Nur. We ask for your light, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, allow this project, Ya Allah, to go forth and remain a means of sadaqatul jariyah, Ya Allah, of continuous charity after all of it has passed, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, we ask you to allow this institution to remain and endure, Ya Allah, until you take back this earth, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, we ask you to bless all of the donors, Ya Allah. All of those that give their time, their effort, and their money to see this project, to see the success of this project, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, for everything and anything that they have given or have ever wanted to give, we ask you for a full reward for them, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, we ask you to allow us to do work which is inspirational so that more will give to this project, Ya Allah, and it will continue far beyond our lives, Ya Allah. And Ya Allah, we ask you in this blessed place, in this blessed time, with these blessed people, to make our best day, our last day when we leave this world and meet you. Wa akhir da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen.